Hey, what's up guys, Tommy here, back again with another video. So a week ago, I posted my full build video on this bike. It's been received very well. I have a lot of, comments saying, great video, this helped me out a lot, lots of likes, lots of views. That's great, but with lots of comments comes lots of questions, and I get a lot of questions on all of my videos on these bikes. So in this video, I'm going to be answering questions on this bike, and I'll also be telling you guys, giving you guys some information that will save you time and money. So if you aren't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button. I make videos on electric vehicles, any electric vehicle I can get my hands on or build. Make sure to like this video and leave a nice comment. That helps with the YouTube algorithm and helps more people get this valuable information. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Spawny, along with a lot of other people, asked, how much did this bike cost me to build? Now that's a great question. So the typical price you're going to see for these things is about $3,000 to $4,000. I ended up spending $4,100, and that is including express shipping. I don't need to tell you why I paid for express shipping. There's definitely a few things I could have done to budget a little better. Maybe I could have bought my motor kit on Alibaba, saved a few hundred there, or maybe I could have got cheaper tires. But I went for the stuff that made me happy, the stuff that I thought was going to perform the best. So there's your answer. So, Little Scout FPV asks, what is the top speed on this bike? 3.5T motor or 5T motor? So this is a great question. Before I built this bike, before I ever got on it and rode it, I just sort of assumed that it had a 70 mph top speed, and I was close, but I'll tell you guys it in a second. A lot of people were like, no, that's not even close to what you're going to get. You're only going to get about 48 mph. So, I was sort of on edge. I was really wondering how fast I was going to go. I know some people with basically the same setup as me get about 70 mph. Sam Johnson, I know you're probably going to end up watching this video. So, hey, he claims to get 70 mph on his bike, so I was thinking I was going to get around that. But I can actually get up to about 65 mph on this bike. I did a speed test where I got up to 60 mph, but it was definitely still going. There was still more juice, but I just didn't want to push it because I was going around a corner. So it's a very, very fast bike. And they asked 3.5T or 5T motor. I have a 3.5T motor, and this is a QS273 motor. So if you don't know, 5T is for low acceleration, high acceleration, low top speed, and 3.5T is for low acceleration, high top speed. Although if you have a lot of power like my bike, it's definitely not going to be low acceleration at all. Daniel Wilhite asks, should I get a Surron or build one of these? Well, that's a very good question. And I'm actually going to grab my brother's Surron tomorrow, bring it over, and I want to do a video comparing the two. In my personal opinion, you're gonna be happy either way. They both have their benefits and their downfalls. This one's cheaper than the Surron, but it's faster. The Surron's gonna be better off road. It all depends on the person, but of course I'm gonna make a video about that so that you can really go down and decide what you want to get. Davey John asks, and I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce your name right, how tall are you? Now, like anybody over 6 feet, I love to share my height. I'm 6 feet and a half inch, and this is what I look like on this bike. This is actually a pretty good question because seeing me on this bike and knowing my height will allow you to get a good idea of what you're going to look like on the bike. By the way, it's much bigger than it looks. Totally Ordinary Gamer asks, what's your distance on one charge? And this was asked by a few people actually. So I have a 72 volt 40 amp hour battery, and I run this bike at 10.8 kilowatts. So a lot of power and a pretty big battery. So I find that I probably will get about 45 to maybe 55 miles on a single charge. That's just an estimation. I haven't done a full range test, which I will eventually. It's just been raining lately, and I've been busy with Christmas and everything. Davey Zhang asks, again, did you build the battery or did you buy it? Well, I was actually thinking and actually really considering building a battery. I had a whole parts list going and everything, but then I just decided, with the other build and everything going on, I feel like it would be much easier to just go ahead and buy a battery. So I went ahead and bought one from China for $1,400. Pretty good deal, honestly, for such a big battery, and it feels pretty quality. There's a link in my other video on this bike. I'm not going to put all the links down below in this video just because that takes a ton of time. But yeah, no, this is a pretty great battery. Wires coming out of it are a bit thin, and I'll talk about that later. But still, yeah, I recommend it. Lost in the Sauce asks, Are you going to post another Enduro e-bike video? No. Next up, I'm going to give you guys a little bit of information that might save you some time and money. So, so next up, we're going to talk about the battery. And I have two things to say about this, which will save people time and money. So a lot of people say, Tommy, how are you getting 65 miles per hour on this bike when I'm only getting 40, 45 miles per hour on it? Well, I'm going to tell you why. That's probably because your battery BMS is not sufficient enough for your controller. Let me explain. So on Alibaba and stuff where a lot of people like to get batteries for these bikes because they're cheap, they sell batteries with BMSs that are only about 50 or 60 amps. Sometimes I've seen them for around 100. But you see, if you have a Savinton 72 150 amp controller, you're only going to use, as much amps as your BMS can produce. So let's say you have a 50 amp BMS. That means you can only pull 50 amps out of your battery into your controller. Let's say you have a 200 amp BMS. Well, you're going to be pulling out 150 amps to your controller because your controller is only going to use as much power as it needs. But if your BMS is smaller than the amount of amps your controller is, well, your controller is going to be only pulling out as much as it can, which, let's say you have a 50 amp BMS. Well, that's 50 amps, unfortunately, and you're not going to be able to go very fast with that. So the next thing I want to talk to you guys about with these Chinese batteries is the battery wires and connectors. So here's my big problem with them. They're way too thin. For a bike that's using this much power, you want the wires to be maybe 2 to 3 times thicker. Let me explain why. So if you know anything about wires, they're kind of like hoses. So let's say you're a fireman and you have to put out a fire. Are you going to use the thick fire hose or are you going to use the thin garden hose? You're going to use the fire hose. Why is that? Because it can put out a larger volume of water much quicker. Why? Because it's thicker and there's a lot less resistance happening with the water. So the same principle applies with batteries. Let's say this is the water and this is the hose and the controller is the fire, and you got to get that water through these hoses to the fire. Well, essentially, if you have thin little garden hoses, it's not going to be able to do that very efficiently, and something called resistance is going to happen. You can think of resistance as friction. So a lot of friction is going through these wires, and what happens with that is it generates heat. And if you have these thin little connectors that originally came with, I swapped them out, that originally come with the battery, what's going to happen is they're going to end up melting because it gets very, very hot, especially if you're using a more powerful machine. So usually with these Chinese batteries, you talk to somebody and you get to customize them. So ask for a thicker gauge of wire. If you buy the battery I have, you talk to this lady named Anne, and she will let you customize your battery to your wishes. Now, the third and final thing I'd like to talk about that might save people, some time, money, is the motor. Now, I have a QS273 motor on this bike, which is a 8,000 watt motor, and it is a very nice and powerful motor. Now, a lot of people seem to think, and I used to think this, maybe a year ago, although I didn't really know much about these electric vehicles, that the wattage that your motor was directly, how fast you're going to go or how much power you're going to have. That's just not true. So with this battery and controller combination, I'm able to produce 10.8 kilowatts of power, and I'm able to run it right through this motor. And this is an 8,000 watt motor. Now what happens when I run it through this motor is it doesn't get very warm at all. Actually, it's actually cold to the touch most of the time. Why? Because it's able to handle that much power just fine. Now, let's say I was able to swap this motor with a 5,000 watt motor. Guess what would happen if I ran the same power through it? Nothing. It would be just as warm, maybe a little bit more warm, but here's why you'd want to do that. Well, the 5,000 watt motor is going to weigh 20 pounds less. So it's a cheaper motor because there's less material there. It makes your bike weigh less. The shipping is going to be less, again, because, the motor is much lighter, and you're just going to have a sleeker, lighter bike, and you're going to have no differentiation in power. there will be a slight difference in the heat of the motor, but when you're running, 12 kilowatts or less, it's really not that big of a deal. You can easily do 5,000 watts with no problem. So I recommend going with a 5,000 watt motor. And that's everything, all of the information and questions I have to answer for this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that thumbs up. In my next video, I'd like to compare this to the Surron X. So without further ado, see you.